There's a 25-year-old social studies teacher at Crystal River Middle School in Florida who happens to also moonlight as the host of a white nationalist podcast called Unapologetic. Her name is Dayanna Volitich, but she's been using the pseudonym Tiana Dalikov on the podcast that she hosts. And in this podcast, the Florida social studies teacher brags about how she teaches her white supremacist views in a public school. She rails against diversity in schools on her podcast. She promotes debunked race IQ conspiracies. She brags about how she has been hiding her white nationalism from school administrators. And she even hosted a guest who said that white nationalists need to infiltrate public schools specifically to become teachers and spread white nationalism. And she agreed with the guest. And she said she is one of those teachers that is doing exactly that. Now, I'm not going to play any of her podcasts for you, but there are episodes available online, which you can find easily if you're interested in that. And like any good white nationalist, obviously, she's anti-Semitic. She loves the work of anti-Semitic author Kevin MacDonald. She has talked about the complex Jewish question, which is a known way of referring to the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory related to Jewish control of media, banking, and politics. She has praised and defended and retweeted neo-Nazis and white supremacists, including the infamous David Duke. And she also believes, and this is so crazy because I told you last week this was happening. Remember that teacher last week in Georgia who fired a gun in school? She said that that was a false flag conspiracy theory, exactly like I told you some lunatic conspiracy theorists were saying. Really checking all of the boxes here. And we have learned over the weekend that Dayanna Volitich has been removed from the classroom. That's the word that's being used. She's not been fired at this point. There's an investigation going on, but she has been removed from the classroom, according to the superintendent of schools there. So obviously that's the right decision. She should be fired. But this is going to bring up questions of free speech. I'm not saying that they are warranted questions, but it is going to bring up questions of free speech because this is a public school, and this is arguably, some will say, a government entity, in other words, public schools are government run, telling her that her speech outside of the classroom disqualifies her from her job, which is, in a sense, the government deciding what speech is okay. However, I don't know that that's the only explanation, because in the podcast, she does admit that she's teaching white nationalist views to students in school. And that's very different because now all of a sudden you can get rid of her because she's teaching white nationalist values in school. So I actually don't think it's an issue of free speech.
Yeah, see, I was going to play devil's advocate and say that all teachers have their own personal opinions, their own personal politics, especially here because she's a social studies teacher, so she knows about government and civics. But as long as you can keep that outside of the classroom, maybe there's a case to be made that you can stay on.
Listen, I am not a free speech absolutist, right? I'm not on, if you think of a spectrum from 0 to 100, 0 being total control of speech, 100 being absolute and total free speech, I'm at like a 96, right? Where I think that incitements to violence, if you go on a plane and you go, that guy, he's a terrorist, attack him, and that's not true, right? That is a type of speech that is okay to regulate because of the implications that it has. Speech regarding when you're talking about something like child pornography, and there's a big debate about pornography being a type of speech. When it goes into child pornography, you are now talking about age of consent. You're talking about someone. It's a different scenario, right? It goes beyond just speech. So I am not a free speech absolutist. I think that I'm like a 96 out of 100 on that issue. But here you do have a situation where she is admitting that this is becoming part of how she is teaching children in schools. And at that point, it does become an issue for the school district. And it's true, if she had a podcast about knitting, you wouldn't care whether she was talking about knitting and evangelizing about knitting to her classroom, because that's not fundamentally at odds with the values of the public school district. This is different, and I think that we will hear free speech complaints from some people. I don't think that they're going to be legitimate or hold up.
And the sad thing is this could actually be beneficial for her career because even though she may lose the teaching job, maybe some right-wing site will take her up and have her podcast, have a podcast on their outlet.
Absolutely. She will be guest hosting for Tucker Carlson for the next 3 weeks, I'm sure. Today's episode of The David Pakman Show is made possible in part by Brilliant. You watch The David Pakman Show or listen to The David Pakman Show, so clearly you're interested in politics and in following what's going on in the world and the economy, the environment. But what's crucial to understand is that almost everything we talk about on this show is sort of on the foundation of math, science, and philosophy. And keeping up with the news is one thing, but you're never really fully equipped to understand political issues and have debates with people until you've actually developed a more complete understanding of how the world works and how these issues work at the most fundamental level. And Brilliant is one of the most effective and enjoyable ways to do that I've ever come across. You can learn hands-on about statistics, crime, climate science, energy. It's a long list. And you can get started right now by signing up for free at brilliant.org/David Pakman. First 200 people who visit brilliant.org/David Pakman will also get 20% off an annual premium membership. Check it out. Sign up for free today at brilliant.org/David Pakman.